One of the relevant issues necessary for a proper understanding of the book of Revelation in its first century context is a consideration of how the emperors tended to portray themselves as divine throughout the empire. This began way back in the time of Julius, but was full blown by the time we get to Domitian's reign. Domitian seeming to be the emperor who is in power when John writes the book of Revelation. So what we want to do in this study and in the next one is to consider how the history of the emperors leans in this direction of the divinization or the deification of the Roman emperors. I note that this is also the original lie. When the serpent said to the woman, "You will be like God if you eat of this tree." The original lie that goes all the way back to Genesis is you can be divine. It was a particular problem for the pharaohs who believed that they were the offspring of Ra, the sun god. Almost every king in the ancient Near East tended to think of himself as an offspring of the divine or the manifestation of a god. And so this becomes a bit of a problem, but I note it not as a problem that is new. This is not a new thing, but certainly one of the issues that has to be considered when we approach the book of Revelation is a full consideration of the cult of the emperor in late first century Asia Minor. And it's not something that in our Revelation studies we're often very aware of. Let's start all the way back with Emperor Julius. There he is. I think he kind of looks like Gary Oldman, but I could be wrong. In an Ephesus town council, right after Julius was pronounced dictator. Now, he's not emperor at this time, he's a dictator, but right after his reign begins, they spoke of him as the God made manifest, God in the flesh, offspring of Ares and Aphrodite, common savior of human life. These terms, God, Savior, these are terms that we'll consider when we get to a different study on the propaganda of the imperial cult later. For now, I just want to note this. This is the way they're talking about him even before he is the full-blown emperor. After his death, the Roman Senate decreed him to be divine. They didn't do so during his lifetime, but after his death, the Senate divinized him, which paved the way for his adopted son, Augustus, whose name was Octavian, to call himself Son of God. If the Senate divinizes his father, if they pronounce his father to be divine, and if he is his son, he is then calling himself Son of God, or son of the God. Let me show you where this appears in a couple of coins minted with Caesar Augustus's picture on it. Here's one coin, and I'd point you to the lower left-hand image here, Caesar Augustus. That's pretty easy to read, even in the Latin that appears on this coin. But in the top right-hand corner, you see the back side of that coin, and it says Divus Iulius, Caesar Augustus. Translated, these are terms that mean Caesar Augustus, son of Julius the Divine, or son of the divine Julius, or let's say it more colloquially, Son of God. Here's another image of that same idea. This one's a little bit different. You see on the left-hand side, Divi, and then the letter F, which means son, divine son, Divi Fili, and Kaiser, and then Julius Divus. And so two different sides of the coin there that say the same thing. He is the divine Caesar, son of God, son of the divine Julius. Augustus was known throughout the empire as king of land and sea. He's known as God of gods and the most divine Caesar. Part of that has to do with the fact that Augustus really saved the Roman Empire from its civil strife after his father died and some of the generals began fighting one another for control. Augustus stepped in and his name was Octavian. He stepped in and saved the empire from that strife, unified the armies, unified the empire, and they began to call him Augustus. Now, August is the word that simply means genuine, but if I had to put it in more colloquial terms that the kids these days could understand, I might say that the word Augustus means the real deal. Here is a relief of, or a statue of Augustus, king of land and sea. I've been over this in a previous video, so you're familiar with this, but I would note that in the lower left-hand corner, let me put my mouse over here. Right here is Gaia, goddess of the earth. And over here is Poseidon. You can see that by the kelp skirt that he's wearing and then the fishtail that he has. So Augustus has his 1 foot on the land and 1 foot on the sea. He is king of land and sea. In this relief, he stands much taller than the gods, and his head is encircled by a rainbow. After the death of Augustus, there are two major changes that happen in Asia Minor, this place where John is writing to the churches of the 7 cities in Revelation. These two changes are very, very important. First of all, temples began to be dedicated to Augustus. He has more temples dedicated to him in this region than any other emperor. We also note the major change. Now, remember, Julius is pronounced divine only after his death by the Senate. With Augustus, things are growing to the point where they're dedicating temples to him. The second thing that we want to note is that there were changes made to the calendar after the death of Augustus. And what that means is that Augustus's birthday was now the start of the new year. It was called the birthday of the god. And so imagine that now the beginning of the year is not January 1st, it's October 28th. Okay, so that would be a weird kind of a thing. You start the new year in October. I don't know if that was Augustus's birthday or not, but I'm saying that whatever his birthday was, they then changed the calendar in Asia Minor. So that's the start of the new year to honor him as the start of every good thing that ever came into the world. So it's beginning to grow a bit, okay, to the point where we get to Caesar Thanos. Wait a minute, that's not right. Here's a coin depicting a temple of Augustus, and you can see certainly there it has some language here on the left-hand side of the coin. The IMP is short for Imperator, which means Almighty. He is the Caesar. And then on the other side of the coin, you have the temple with that typical Corinthian structure with at the top of it, it says Rome et Auguste. And it's hard to get all that crammed into a tiny little space on the back of a very tiny coin. But what it really signals is Rome and Augustus. Rome's fate is tied to Augustus. And in some of the coins, it'll be the goddess Roma actually crowning Augustus to be king of the empire. Later comes Emperor Tiberius. The major change happening during the reign of Tiberius is that where with Augustus, they were dedicating temples to him very near to his death. With Tiberius, cities in Asia Minor began building temples to him during his lifetime. They're not waiting until he's dead anymore to begin to build the temples to him. Now, the place where Tiberius intersects with our stories in the New Testament, probably most poignantly, has to do with the Tiberius coin. When Jesus was standing in the temple courts and the Jewish leaders came to him and said, hey, is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Tiberius was the Caesar at that point. Jesus said, show me a coin. And they showed him a coin with the emperor's face on it. Now, it's very, very likely this is the coin that they showed him. This coin over on, let's start right down here, Kaiser. So this is Tiberius, Caesar, Divi, divine, Aug. You have to kind of turn your head upside down. Aug, which is genuine. F is for Fili, son of, and then Augustus. So why have the Aug and then the separate Augustus? Well, remember the word August means genuine or real deal. And so Tiberius, Kaiser Divi, August Fili, Augustus, Pontifex Maximus. You see the pontiff right over here and then the maxim over here. Now, the coin is saying something very, very significant. Here's what it's saying. Tiberius Caesar, genuine son of the divine Augustus, high priest. Here is another image of the same kind of coin. This one's been a little bit more rubbed off by the thumbs, I suppose you could say, but it is the same basic image. You've got the goddess Roma on one side of the coin. You've got Tiberius on the other side of the coin. And the coin says to everyone who can read it, this is Tiberius Caesar. He is the genuine son of the most high divine Augustus, and he is high priest of Rome. Now, it's curious to me that when they bring this coin to Jesus, they ask, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Jesus says, show me a coin. They hand over the coin, which means they're paying the tax. They've got the coins in their pocket to pay the tax. But he says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and you give to God what is God's. I do not for a minute think that Jesus is talking about tithing in this text. He is not talking about give Caesar the money that belongs to him and give God the money that belongs to him. I think what he really is saying is this, that if Tiberius claims to be the Son of God, if he claims to be the high priest, there is one in their midst, Jesus, who is the genuine Son of God and the high priest in Israel. And they are neither giving Jesus nor Caesar the respect that either of them deserve. They're not giving God the respect he deserves by recognizing that Jesus is who he says he is. And so there are respect issues all over that. What I want to focus on here for our purposes is the coin itself that is signaling to everyone who holds it that Caesar Tiberius believes that he is son of the divine Augustus. He is son of God. After him comes Gaius Caligula. Caligula is the word that means little boots, and I can't not think of Lord Farquaad from Shrek, the man with the tiny feet. Our purposes here are really centered around the fact that Caligula divinized himself in front of the Senate. Now think about how these things are growing. Julius was divinized by the Senate after his death. With Augustus, they're building temples to him near the end of his life. With Tiberius, they're building temples to him during his lifetime. They're pronouncing these guys divine after their death. But now Caligula divinizes himself in front of the Senate. He also divinized his own horse. He wanted to be able to ride his favorite horse in the fields of Elysium as he raced Russell Crowe across the wheat fields there. And so he divinized his own horse, because I suppose just saying it makes it so. He tried to erect a statue of himself in the Jerusalem temple. This became a problem in around 39 AD, I think it was, that he tried to erect this statue of himself inside the Jerusalem temple. Remember, if he thinks he's a god, his statue is then an idol. And Jews don't allow idols. They don't worship idols. They don't allow them in the temple. And so it was some weird stuff where he sends the statue, and some Jewish men meet them with this. You can't just drop off a statue. You see that thing coming from miles away, and it takes forever to move it. And so the Jewish men meet him at the front door, and they say, over our dead bodies, are you going to put that in here? I'm paraphrasing, by the way. And they say, we can make that happen. And cooler heads prevailed, and nothing ever came of it. Okay. Everett Ferguson, in his backgrounds of the New Testament, says Jews were not the only ones relieved when in AD 41, at his death, Caligula learned that he was not a god. Caligula was a little bit crazy, and he was not a very good or nice emperor. Next, after Caligula comes up, wait a minute, that guy's not a Roman emperor. Emperor Nero. Nero is called the good God in a votive inscription sometime at the beginning of his reign. It makes me think of Jesus saying there is only one who is good, and that is God alone. Now, it's not that Jesus said that during the reign of Nero. As you can tell, this is about 20 to 30 years after Jesus has left the planet, if you will. But it makes me think of that. They call Nero the good God. And as you know, Nero was not very kind. He was not very nice to the Christians. He set part of Rome on fire, the slums of Rome that he wanted to rebuild. He set them on fire. He blamed the Christians for that, said that he took some stuff out of 2 Peter out of context. He knew that the Christians talked about the world being destroyed by fire, so they were an easy scapegoat for him to do the things that he wanted to do. We think that Nero is the one who put Peter and Paul to death as trophies of the faith. We know that he used to round up Christians and light them on fire for his all-night orgies in the palace. He was not a very good emperor. He still believes that he is divine. Then comes Emperor Vespasian. Vespasian might have been the best actual emperor on this whole list. Vespasian was a battle-hardened war general. And so he's the one who starts the campaign to siege Jerusalem in AD 67. He will then have to leave that campaign to come back to Rome to take over as emperor. He leaves his son, Titus, in charge. And then Titus's brother was Emperor Domitian. But as far as Vespasian goes, his last recorded statement is this: "Alas, I think I am becoming a god." There is a belief that the Roman emperors are going to be divine, if not in life, then certainly in death. Now, Vespasian's son, his second son, Domitian, is the one who seems to be in power when John writes the book of Revelation. I've made mention before of the Domitian coin, but I want to go over that again in case this is the first time you're encountering these ideas. This is a very popular coin of Zeus enthroned in the heavens. On the left there, you kind of have the image of Alexander the Great. On the right, you have the image of Zeus. Zeus is sitting on his throne in the heavens. I know he's sitting in heaven because he is sitting either with the sun or with a star. He's got in his right hand a phoenix bird, which is the symbol of resurrection, which basically is the visual way for people who can't read of signaling Zeus is eternal. Now, Zeus is enthroned in the heavens, and everyone knew this is the icon of Zeus. This is how you think about Zeus in the ancient world. The reason I bring that up here is that Domitian had a son who died in infancy, and to commemorate that son, Domitian had this coin minted of his son. Notice how that child is seated on top of the world with the stars around him. He is enthroned in the heavens. Here is a different coin of this very same kind of image. Keep in mind, they don't machine stamp these coins. They have to carve them all by hand. And so it becomes a little bit difficult to make them exact, but they do make the very same kinds of images. And so you have Domitian on the left-hand side, and then Domitian's child seated on top of the world with 7 stars around him and his right hand out in front of him. Remember, John calls Jesus the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand. Here is another image of that same very kind of coin. Let's go back to this one. Let me show you what this says right here. IMP, Imperator, or Almighty Caesar, Domitianus, Aug, PM. What this really says is the Most High Caesar, Domitian, the genuine Pontifex Maximus, or genuine high priest. Over here on this side, so this is Domitian, the real deal, Almighty Caesar and high priest of Rome. Over here, Divus, divine son of Kaiser, Caesar, IMP, Imperator, Most High, or Almighty, Domitiani, and then there's that F, which is the shorthand for Fili. The divine son of Caesar, Almighty, Domitian, his son. So this coin is being spread all over the empire to commemorate the death of Domitian's child. And I note that he is casting his child as seated in the heavens the way that Zeus is always portrayed as seated in the heavens, which tells us that he thinks that even as young as his child was divine. Domitian is the emperor in power when John writes the book of Revelation. And so we think that a lot of what John is writing has to do with that Domitianic background. We do know that every city mentioned in Revelation 2 and 3 has some aspect of the veneration of Domitian. So by the time John wrote Revelation, there was a well-established network of temples devoted to the worship or the deification or honoring of the emperor, to civic clubs devoted to promoting the worship of the emperor, and people in official positions of promotion to do nothing but promote the worship of the Roman emperor. It seems best at this point to take a tour of the 7 cities and see how extensive that network was and where these ideas show up. Let's start in Ephesus. Ephesus was known as Warden of the 4 temples. They had temples dedicated to Claudius and Nero. That's one temple shared to the honoring of both of them. One to Hadrian, though he is a little bit later, and Severus, a little bit later for our purposes. And one dedicated to Domitian. That particular temple was dedicated in 89 or 90 AD, which would have been very, very near to the time when John wrote Revelation. Ephesus started their own Olympic Games in honor of Domitian and called him Zeus Olympius, creator of the earth. There's an inscription in the Domitian temple that I want to point out to you. It says, I'll show you a picture of the temple in a moment here. The inscription says, to Emperor Domitian, Caesar Sebastus Germanicus. Now, these are, Sebastus is the Julio-Claudian line, Germanicus is the Vespasian line. And so there's the honoring of Domitian as coming in that Julio-Claudian Vespasian succession of emperors. Here's what's left of the temple of Domitian in Ephesus. And I want to point out to you this column right here. That right there is the image of Domitian, and somewhere in this particular temple, this was carved, to Emperor Domitian, Kaiser Sebastus Germanicus. After Domitian's death, they changed that inscription. Now, how do you change an inscription that's carved in stone or in marble? Well, what they did was to sort of chisel out his name, and underneath of it, cross it out and honor his father, to Emperor God Caesar Sebastus Vespasian. Domitian was not very well regarded by folks after his death, and so in order to erase his memory from their city and from their temple, they just cross it out, and they keep the temple that is dedicated to the worship of the emperor, but they change the emperor for whom that temple is dedicated. One notable development that we want to see in Ephesus is that professional choirs that were once paid to compose songs for Artemis. Remember, the Temple of Artemis is in Ephesus. It is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and they love Artemis. If you remember, all the people are shouting at the riot in Ephesus in Acts 19, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." There's a professional choir in Ephesus that is paid to do nothing but compose and perform songs for Artemis. But the development now in Ephesus in the late 1st century is that now they are paid to compose songs to the Roman emperor. Well, what about Smyrna? Smyrna was bidding for the contract to build a temple to Tiberius during his lifetime. They beat out 10 other cities vying for that contract. Well, that's a big deal. And among those cities were Pergamum. They were rejected because they already had the temple to Augustus in this region. Ephesus got beat out because they already had the temple to Artemis. Laodicea got beat out because they were financially weak at that time. Smyrna could trace its bloodlines all the way back to the royal family. So it got the contract to build the temple to Tiberius, and that's the connection with the empire worship that we have here in the letters to the 7 churches. As far as Pergamum goes, we've already noted that they have several temples dedicated to emperors in Pergamum. One is a temple dedicated to the worship of Augustus, one to Trajan, and one to Severus. Here's what's left of the temple to Trajan. It's going to be a little late for our purposes, but it does indicate for us the tendency toward building temples to the Roman emperors that is on the rise. This is the temple of Trajan at Pergamum. Remember what's left of it. And you can see this was a massive structure. This is how Romans thought about temples. And so the one to Augustus is going to look very much like this, with a long archway, sort of a walkway leading up with the temple at the end, so that you have some sense of anticipation as you approach it. Here's a coin depicting the temple of Augustus. We don't have any of the remains of the temple of Augustus in Pergamum, but we do have some coins that suggest to us what it looked like. Again, you have Caesar Augustus here. This is Tiberius with other parts of his name on the left-hand side. And then you have the temple and the goddess Roma putting a victory crown on Caesar Augustus. And so Tiberius, this particular coin demonstrates for us that Caesar Augustus is believed by the Romans to be the high priest of the goddess Roma. He is high priest of Rome, and she is crowning him victorious. There's an inscription in the temple of Augustus in Pergamum that we know of that read like this: the Neoi honored Gaius Julius Sacerdos, the Neocorus, or the temple guardian, the warden of the temple. Like, this is the guy who's in charge of the place. They honored this guy this guy Julius as the warden of goddess Rome, and here's for our purposes, and of God Caesar Augustus. They know, they believe that Caesar Augustus is divine, and they know what words to use to describe him that way. It reminds me of John saying to the church in Pergamum, I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. In Pergamum, there was an inscription. There are 5 fragments of a marble pedestal that read, the Emperor Caesar, son of God, the God Augustus, of every land and sea, the overseer. And so I've said that they had described Augustus as king of land and sea. Certainly you can see it here, but notice the language that's being used. He is son of God. He is divine. He is king of land and sea. This is how Pergamum thinks about Caesar Augustus, even after his death. Well, let's go on over to Sardis. This is the corner of a temple that was dedicated to Emperor Domitian. Now, as far as human history goes, this is new to us. This was only uncovered in 1982. And so we're still working on trying to piece all this stuff together. But it seems to have been a temple dedicated to the honoring of Emperor Domitian. In Philadelphia, there's no imperial temple that we know of, but I want to note one thing. This city is constantly changing its name. At one point, it called itself Neo-Caesarea, which is City of the New Emperor, or New City of the Emperor. They did this to sort of gain connections with Rome and to be noted as those who are very, very loyal to Caesar. And at one point, Philadelphia adopted the name Flavius, which is the first name adopted by many of the emperors. When we go to Laodicea, we don't have an imperial temple in the city, but do note this. Laodicea got beat out by Smyrna, as we noted, for the Tiberias contract. And so when they got beat out for that, they decided to dedicate their archway to Emperor Domitian, the archway into the city to Emperor Domitian, and they minted coins in his honor. Here's what's left of the Laodicean gate, dedicated to Emperor Domitian. And here's an image of a coin minted in honor of Emperor Domitian with his wife's image on the reverse side of that coin. Now, these are what we know of the letters to the 7 churches and how the imperial cult is factoring in that area. There are 2 other cities in Asia Minor that deserve mention in our discussion of the imperial cult in Asia Minor, and that is Miletus and Aphrodisias. Now, let me show you on a map where those particular cities appear. They're very close to the cities to which John writes the letters of the 7 churches in Revelation 2 and 3. Here's the map, and notice Miletus is right here, just south of Ephesus. Aphrodisias is right here, just southwest of Laodicea. In Miletus, there was a temple dedicated to Caligula. The temple there, or the cult, let's just say the structure, the business of the temple, the cult was experimental at the time. But for the first time, it was here that for the first time ever, they used the word God in worship of him. That particular cult failed. It did not last. But one thing that did remain, which will become very, very important for our reading of Revelation 12 and 13, was the office of the high priest of Asia. This person was hired, stationed in Miletus, and hired for the sole purpose of promoting emperor worship throughout Asia Minor. So this person is sort of like the president of the booster club. This person's job is to make sure that in all of Asia Minor, the worship of the emperor is in place, that it is functioning well, and even that it is growing. So he is the high priest of Asia, that person whose job is to promote worship of the emperor. That'll become important for us later. Aphrodisias lay just southwest of Laodicea. Here there was a temple dedicated to the veneration of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, what we call the Sebastoi. Here's a picture of that temple. They call it the Sebastion, the Temple of the Royals is what I'm calling it. That's not its official title, but it beats using all the official terms for it, which are all in Latin. This particular complex was pretty massive, and it works in conjunction with the high priest of Asia and the other cults that are happening in Asia Minor to promote worship of the emperor in this particular region. Well, the dedication of the emperors is growing from the time we start with Julius until the time we get to the reign of Domitian. Initially, it was the Senate that divinized Julius after his death. But one step forward, and Augustus is appropriating his father's divine status to mean that he is Son of God. Tiberius saw temples built to him during his own lifetime. Caligula is divinizing himself before the Senate and seeing an experimental cult in Miletus rise up to promote the worship of him. Domitian is demanding that everyone call him Lord and God. We'll cover that soon. All of this is really a pressing concern for John's readers, because these Roman emperors are not just, it's when you worship them and honor them and perform all your things that you would do in favor of them, for burning incense and singing the songs and whatnot. It's hard to know how much of it in our context is very much like singing the national anthem or referring to our presidents as, you know, the supreme leader. I don't think that's what it's like. Someone pointed out to me once, is this any different than having a coin of George Washington's face on it and it says, "In God we trust"? I think it is different, because we know that those who framed the nation of the United States, they understood who George Washington is. They also understood that those original founders did not believe George Washington to be divine. They founded this country on Judeo-Christian principles. And so they're honoring him as the first president and then saying, "In God we trust" as a nation. Now, whether we do any longer or not, that's a different issue. I'm saying that's what they meant when they coined those phrases. That was an unintentional pun. I don't think that's what's going on in the first century Greco-Roman Empire. I think those guys believe that they are divine. They're putting themselves, their kids, on the coins, signaling to everyone that they are divine. So this poses a real problem for John's readers. How much of this is idolatry and how much of it is civic duty, or what we might call patriotism? I think John's readers have a real problem in this area. John's readers are faced with serious idolatry issues. And the real question that they have in front of them is, who is the world's true and rightful Lord? Is it Jesus, or is it the emperor? And can those two things be honored at the same time? That's a growing problem for John's readers, and something that John is having to confront all along the way.